hectic schedule. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So the mic is all yours. Please feel free to introduce the presenters. And I'll meet you soon then. Bye-bye. Take care.
Well, thank you. All right. I welcome you all to this session. And without wasting any time, because time is a constraint, we're going to begin with the very first paper by Prashanto Sharkar. And he's going to be talking on borders and boundaries, partition, displacement, and rehabilitation in the Bollywood movie Mimi. Now, also, I want all the speakers to keep in mind that you have 10 minutes. So please try to keep a check on time. I will check on my stopwatch, and I'll remind you 2 minutes before it's time. Thank you so much. So I hope we have the first speaker with us.
Am I audible?
Yeah,
we do. And it would be very kind of you all if you can just switch on your camera when you are presenting, because that ways, we can have all our attention directed in one place. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Right. And Madhuri, just one thing I wanted to know, we are taking Q&A towards the end, right?
Yes, Ved. Also, I wanted to inform you that the second presenter on your list, that is Amrita, is not going to be with us today. Something very urgent came up, right? So we can use that time for interaction during the question and answer session, or you can be kind to the presenters and you can give them 2 minutes extra, right? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Over to you, Prashant. Now you can start. Yeah. Yeah, please, you can begin with your paper. Yeah.
Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, good morning. My due regards to the chairperson, Dr. Ved Prakash, and other dignitaries, and my love to the other paper presenters. And I don't know whether students are over here or not, and my love to the students. I'm Prashanto Sharkar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Ghatal Rabindra Shatavarshiki Mahavidyalaya. It is in West Bengal and India. Well, so the title of my paper is the border and boundaries, partition, displacement, and rehabilitation in the Bollywood movie Mimi. As we know that diaspora studies deals extensively with migration, displacement, and its consequences. Even though displacement helped to bring about developments in all the fields, but it also created many problems physically and psychologically, like as well from the host community, identity crisis, cross-cultural conflict, alienations, home and host issues, trauma of uprooting and rerouting, and gender problems. So since the 1940s, in the Hindi films industry or Hindi films, the partition has well been depicted. Okay. Now, borders and boundaries, they're commonly defined as lines dividing distinct political, social, and legal territories. While partition sounds smooth on paper, the truth was very horrific. More than 8 million people migrated and a million died within the process. The forced migrations, violence, mass widowhood were well documented in the movies. Now, as displacement is the direct opposite of place, as Cambridge Dictionary defines the situation in which people are forced to leave the place where they normally live. According to Angelica Brammer, displacement is the separation of people from their native culture, either through physical distortion, that is, refugees, immigrants, migrants, exile, or expatriates, or the colonizing imposition of foreign culture. Now, physical, spatial, cultural, psychological, and intellectual displacement, these are the type of displacement in the 21st century, and all of them that can be attributed to the characters that is shown in this movies based on displacement or uh, partition. Now let us talk about the movie, how partition, displacement, and rehabilitation uh, play out in the Bollywood movie Mimi that we have all more or less we have watched. Uh, uh, as we know that a woman's life is barely her own, and it reminds me of Rousseau's comment: "Man is born free, but everywhere is in chains." Okay, so basically, women's life that is to be controlled by somebody else that we are observing. Most of the time, her autonomy over her body is determined by her environment, and there the factors are society, socialization, economy, politics. Now, Mimi, um, a stunning 25 years old dancer, he has the autonomy to decide whether she should go with surrogacy because she needs to fulfill her Bollywood dreams to become an actress. However, her agency over her body that ends the moment when the American couple they you know uh, they abandon their plan. Thereafter, it is up to Mimi whether she should go with her child in her womb. We see that Mimi is heartbroken over the betrayal, and it is the loss of her dreams. But she is much more courageous. She decides to carry on her pregnancy, and after giving birth to her child, she wants to raise her own. And one thing I have forgotten to tell you that the American couple they uh, abandoned the plan because you know they have known from the doctor that this is a misconception that the child will born as abnormal. But ultimately, we see whenever Mimi gives birth to the child is absolutely normal. Now, during this process, what is happening psychologically? She was apart from becoming a Bollywood actress, and it was like psychological displacement. As a surrogate mother, she enjoys the femininity and rehabilitation of motherhood. The newborn baby boy gets parted from his real parents, that can be the symbol of his homeland, and is raised by surrogate mother, by Mimi, and it is the symbol of foreign land. The boy gets a hybrid identity. It is enough to prove that the borders and boundaries, these are actually nothing. This is socially constructed notions. And also, interestingly, the American couple, after not getting their biological son back, they adopt an Indian, black Indian girl, which further suggests the cross-cultural transaction and hybridity. And in this way, ultimately, the message is very clear that humanity is thus rehabilitated. Now, Mimi and the American couple represent symbolic commentary on a displacement and the trauma that comes from it. Mimi's suffering reflects that of the refugees fleeing from the partition. Mimi's continuous denial and constant demand from the American couple for their baby back. These are all evocative of the fractured identities and loss of belonging that are present throughout the relationship. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Prashant Sharka. Also, I forgot to mention, he's an assistant professor, as he said, as the Department of English, Ghota Ravindra Sotabar Sikhi Mahavidyalaya, Ghota. All right, now we don't have the second speaker with us. We'll move on to the third paper, and it is titled Dialectics of Space and No Space, Studies in Diasporic Discourse. And for this, we have it's a joint paper by Muhammad Nurul Kayam, lecturer of English, Bangladesh Army University of Engineering and Technology, Kadirabad, Bangladesh, and Sharmila Akhtar, who is also a lecturer of English at Bangladesh Army University of Engineering and Technology, Kadirabad, Bangladesh. Over to you. Thank you so much. Yeah, Sharmin, you have to unmute. Are you able to unmute? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, perfect.
First of all, I want to convey my heartiest gratitude to the conference team who have added such a nice conference titling From the Partition to Pandemic Convergences in the Humanities. I'm really happy to be a part of this conference, and I'm working in collaboration with my colleague and Nurul Kayum. So I will present the paper, and hopefully he will respond to the question answer session. Our title is Dialectics of Space and No Space, Studies in Diasporic Discourse. Home is where your feet are, and may your heart be there too. This is no longer an opposite definition of home in the contemporary geopolitical scenario around the world. This psychological state of home has been very vaguish for quite a time, but currently the mass displacement worldwide warrants an outright definition of home, both physically and mentally, since the present outcry for identity of the displaced individuals and concentration has been a burning question in the international arena. Historically, along with biblical exodus, there had been numerous examples of mass migration since Tower of Babel. What makes present migrations different from former ones is the juridical functions the states now play over their citizens. These juridical functions actively, in any given condition, contribute to the state the citizens are in. The state, Butler and Spivak argue, cannot be defined indiscriminately. In recent times, state is not always the nation state. Rather, some new forms of state are politically in practice. It has become difficult to put any particular citizen or mass in these forms of state, nation state, non-national states, and security states. What legal protection and right we are to enjoy depends upon what kind of state we are in. In broad sense, a state can provide, expel, or bar. This multifarious function decides whether one belongs, does not, or stays in a quasi-permanent state. Identity, too, is connected with belonging and non-belonging. Anindya Roy, in his essay, Post-Coloniality and the Politics of Identity in the Diaspora, Figuring Home, Locating History, says that traditionally, the home has served as the site of origin. But globalization and new Cold War has thrown into a state where the sense of origin hardly comes to mind. Frequent movement across the borders, both legally and illegally, dissipates the concept of national borders and strengthens global attitude among the earthlings. This attitude poses questions of belonging and no belonging, possession and dispossession, and of identity. For example, when serial refugees are invited as Gastarbeiter in Germany, they neither are stripped of their Syrian identity due to the treatment they receive from the host country, nor are they assimilated in the German society. They are labeled as Syrian to refugee to guest worker. This title, guest worker, connotes different sense in different geographical locations. In Southern Europe and the USA, they are illegal residents. In Malaysia and the Middle East, they are easy pickings for exploitation. There is no concrete definition as how to put these individuals in any categories in any definition of a state. Butler and Spivak specifically talk about a Spanish minority in the US to elucidate their state in the US. They refer to a particular event where illegal guest workers from Mexico sing the national anthem of the US in Spanish to what President Bush retorted in anger. These displaced Latin migrants who came to the US for better job opportunities are put in constant state of relocation. Their feet are not fixed, always in move, always unstable. In the 70s, Germany made similar initiatives with Turkey. In 50 years, the Turkish migrants in Germany have apparently solidified their identity as Turkish migrants in Germany, neither a German nor a Turk. Although they have their steady feet in a place, they now psychologically they are still Beider Bugon in an essay rethinking and rewriting Heimat, Turkish women writers in Germany. Heike Henderson says that Turks are still far from finding their feet in Germany. Politische Suche for Heimat or home is still an ongoing action. It is interesting to see how Germany's new relocation project with Syrian refugees will fare in the near future. Dislocation, according to Butler and Spivak, does not lead a person to bare life. In fact, in today's world, nobody is dragged down to a bare life. What happens is that the juridical systems of any state put them in such a predicament where they stayed in a Trishanku condition. Giorgio Agamben calls it a state of exception in his book Homer Caesar, Sovereign Power and Bare Life. In Butler's words, what distinguishes containment from expulsion depends on how the line is drawn between the inside and the outside of the nation state. Alluding to Agamben and referring to her own theory of juridical system, she states that the bare life is an expression of highly juridified states of disposition. States act in its self-interest to suspend rights to the minorities or deport them, even to annihilate them in the name of nationalism and national security. Disposition occurs when people have been deported and or have lost their rights or have been displaced from their homes or have been maintained as second-class citizens vulnerable to state power and without access to any of the rights or entitlements that constitute the prerogative of citizenship, displacements and dispossession. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Charmin, for this very interesting paper. I'm sure there'll be questions in the end. And now, very quickly, we can move on to the next paper. That is the last paper of the session by Nirbachita Rotsi Progda. She is a lecturer at the Department of English, Bangladesh Army University of Science and Technology, Saidpur, Bangladesh. And the title is Pangs of Partition Beyond the Rhetoric of Nation, Deciphering Gendered Violence in Sadat Hasan Manto's Cold War. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Prakash. First of all, I want to convey my heartiest gratitude to the organizers and you. It's my pleasure to join you all and present my paper. I will not much time. I'll be moving to my paper. So let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to introduce myself. I am Nirbachita Rotsi Progda, lecturer, Department of English, Bangladesh Army University of Science and Technology, Saidpur, Bangladesh. The paper I'm going to present today is titled Pangs of Partition Beyond the Rhetoric of Nation, Deciphering Gendered Violence in Sadat Hassan Manto's Kholdo. So, when we speak of war and partition and the traumas that follow it, we cannot help but think of one of the largest partitions in our human history, the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947. And one writer who has brilliantly illustrated all the scars and wounds, heartaches, and agonies is Sadat Hassan Manto. Being one of the living victims of the partition, Manto, even in his short stories such as Kholdu, masterfully etched people's plight during those days. Even the spaces between the lines carry horrors, suffering, and pleas that tie readers to the sufferer's psyche, although we know the weight of the lived sorrow is unparalleled and beyond reach in every aspect. Now, Manto himself was a very close observer of the psychological damage that caused by the India's 1947 partition. He saw all those traumas and the suffering of the people. His human deception of those displaced people, society, and humanity in both his fictional and non fictional portrayals of the partition are truly remarkable. The short story, Kholdo, is undeniably one of his finest works, according to me, wherein he went on to show the world how even crises and catastrophes, as much like a war, partition, mass migration, and displacing, can still be very discriminatory and unequal for different groups, especially when we consider gender. This paper takes Mantos Kholo as a case in point to shed light on the brutality, especially sexual violence against women of all ages and groups that occurs during any societal or national collapse, when anxiety, grief, and terror take over the human psyche and even rekindle the innate desire to be violent. In her Memories of Partition, revisiting Sadat Hassan Manto, I want to quote Shudha Tiwari. She was protectors, turns out be rapist throughout the
Way do we look at home in the 21st century, wherein there is an enormous amount of intervention of, let's say, technology and digital tools in our personal sphere, right? And how do we engage, this very idea of home, or let's say the absence of home, right? Wherein again we talk about what's happening in Ukraine, and wherein technology and internet has become a way to connect, in terms of the whole crisis. And the third paper by Nirvachita Pragya, wherein she talks about this very well-known story by Manto Kholdo. I was also wondering, if you could also refer to the stories by Manto, that also talk about violence, on women. And I think I remember this one story, License. And again, it talks about again what you said, in terms of that how the character in Kholdo doesn't have a voice, right? Sakina doesn't have a voice. And again, License, deals around, the same politics of agency and absence of voice. And also there are other stories, for instance, Kali Salwar, and that also talk about women and what really women went through during the partition. But the question I have, and what I'm really curious about, is when we talk about violence that women had to face during the partition. Of course, there is this, understanding that, well, there were men, and who were after women, that which of course is true. But also, I think we need to understand and talk about a lot of men who were family members or neighbors who were known to, women. Even they were, the perpetrators of violence, right? So again, over here, when you talk about Sakina, and wherein Sakina's father meets this group of boys who apparently knew the father, right? And instead of helping Sakina's father in the search for, the daughter, they end up, raping Sakina. And that again, makes me curious about, in what way, do we read partition narratives and the violence on women from the point of view of men, who are neighbors, who are from the mohalla, who are from the street, or also the men who are the family members, and in what way they sort of, perpetrated violence. For instance, Urvashi Battalion, for the interviews, in fact, talks about how women were seen as the depository of honor, right? And in fact, Kamla Bhashin and Ritumen in their work talk about how overnight, brothers and fathers and neighbors turn killers, right? So I think this can be a very good sort of, dynamic to explore. And maybe if Navachitra, if you would want to respond to it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so maybe if the first person, Prashant, if you like to say, or not, and if we have, yeah, any one of you who would like to, maybe we can go in order, or if Navachita, would you like to talk about if you came across, and of course, if there are questions from the audience too. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. I was intending to point that out but I was thinking that I was running out of time. Therefore, I had to conclude it shortly. Uh, you pointed a very good point. In my paper, I explored that women in general are considered as object. That I said, once a woman is subject to sexual violence, she becomes very unattached to her own family. Even so, it's all about if the purity of the women lies in the body. The same thing is happening here. It's not all about just a partition, or it's not a matter of fact in this particular area of partition or war. This is just the thing is that the war has such a chaotic vibration in it, that those suppressed desires of men to commit violence and commit crimes just gives in rise. Well, they say that everyone is committing some kind of crime, so why not me? It's kind of turns into an opportunity to this. It is not like those are not present in our current situation. As I mentioned, it's also present in our current scenarios as well. It's just an opportunity. When everything is perfect, we do not see our neighbors or the people around us targeting us or catcalling us. In fact, that those people who are in our close context, we do not see that specifically or in normal. But then again, when a chaos is brought into the society, those morality or those fissures or the mass that is suppressed in us starts to fall apart. They start to fall apart and they give rise to the things. Apparently, those young men, as they replied, if your daughter is alive, you will be reunited. They seem very true, and they have been brought in very women and children in safety. But again, when they find Sakina alone, they see that as an opportunity, and instead of handing over to her father, they start to exploit it. And as we see, even in the 1971, women or female being weak in biologically, uh, we know that we are weaker than men in biological term. So it is very easy to target them if you want to take revenge on someone, as we see in our current scenarios as well. I am not. I have such aggression with against someone, grudge against someone that's target his or her female members of the family. It's such a same tendency we see here. The thing is, even in our 1971 partition, liberation actually of Bangladesh, the war, we see that there are issues that there are jar full of female breasts cut out into them. So that's just a form of violation. That's just some kind of thing to exercise that I can do. To they state that I can harm you in a way. It's just a form of exercising power.
Right,
And
right.
I was intending to explore that actually. I
Right.
don't know if I was able to answer your question, but I'll be exploring that in my paper.
Yeah, thank you.
Laboratory.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say that I don't agree that men are stronger than women, but again, we can talk about that later.
Yes, yes, that's
Uh,
another debate.
yeah,
As we know, the in the partition also female took part, but those were not silenced. Those were not represented
right,
in much narratives that we read. That is the thing. It seems like the patriarchal point of view of us, they represent women as they are weak, and those voices and those actions are always being silenced, if not always, most of the time.
right. And just to very quickly check on the other two speakers, if you would like to address uh, uh, the questions that I had put up, or because in the chat box so far we don't have any question. Prashanto, if you're
Hi, hi. Yeah, I just wanted to intervene on behalf of Prashanto. He just dropped a message saying that he had to attend to some urgent work in
right,
his college. So he asked me to apologize on his behalf. Um,
no problem.
can you please repeat the question? I will try my best to answer that question.
Perfect. I think I'll just drop the question on text or in the chat on. All right. And right, I think we're wasting time. So we can, okay, Madhuri, we can take that up later on.
Okay, okay, all right. But please remember, I'll be very happy to answer that particular question that you asked. Thank you.
No problem. Now, and about Muhammad Nurul Qayyam and Sherman's paper, and that's what I was just more curious about, wherein how do we understand the idea of space and non-space, not only within the dominion of so-called physical spaces and boundaries, but also in terms of virtual that now very much is a part of real too, right? And the kind of hate, the kind of incarceration, the kind of propaganda that goes around in the virtual. So if you feel like you can respond, else it's okay. And also what I want to just add to what Nirbachita was talking about in terms of war and women, and that somewhat reminded me of Brecht's play that I was discussing, I think a couple of semesters back, Mother Courage and Her Children. And very interestingly, within the play, again, we see how women, are often targeted, in any space of conflict, right? And again, this very notion, this very idea. For instance, what happened in Ukraine recently, wherein some Indian students they were trying to cross the border, and then this girl had put up the video on the social media space that the boys were thrashed by the Russian army and the women were taken away, right? And there is no trace of where exactly were they taken to, right? So again, this very idea of targeting, female bodies, right? And also, almost, how the men in conflict zones thinks that is there, sort of, they have the license to violate, female bodies to no limit. I think that something needs to be, understood, not only in the terms of national spaces and boundaries, but also in terms of psychology, right? In what way these conflict spaces function vis-a-vis the idea and the domain of psyche, right? And there have been, in fact, a lot of case studies wherein we talk about conflict spaces and and how it leaves behind an entire history of trauma, and how that entire history of trauma compels individuals to act in a certain way, right? And these acts of behavior can be very, very violent, right? So again, and also just one last point that I wanted to add to about and that reminded me of Ice Candy Man. This one reference of the text wherein this train is coming from Gurdaspur, and Dil Nawaz is waiting for his aunts to arrive, and of course he finds dead bodies. The train full of dead bodies, and I think that at that particular moment, his entire worldview towards society changes, right? And then later on, the person Aya that he was very close to, he ends up abducting her, and he takes her to Hira Mandi, that is in Lahore, and then he forces her to act as a prostitute, right? And then eventually, when there is a news that's going around that as part of the rehabilitation process that was initiated both by the Indian government and the Pakistani government, that how Aya will be soon taken to Amritsar to her home, Dil Nawaz marries her at that moment. Now, also, I think one area within partition studies that we often don't talk about is this very, idea of forced marriages that happened, right? And forced marriages not only, on the lines wherein the perpetrator is, forcing you to marry, him, but also how families were in a rush and a hurry to, get their daughters married off, during the partition, because they did not want to take up the responsibility of, of like what happens to them, right? And I think the perfect example again is from Ice Candyman, wherein we have this Dalit character, Papu. And Papu, I mean, is married off to a man who's probably 40 years old, and Papu is just barely 13 or 14, right? So how, this kind of a hurry that, well, we don't want to take up the responsibility and therefore we must get rid of you. And also this just last bit that I want to add, uh, to this very idea of missing women and abducted women. Now also we need to talk about families, that how a lot of times when women got back home somehow, families did not want to accept them, right? And I think the reason why, it could also be this very societal way to look at women who went missing, right? uh, this very notion that, now they are not really, I mean, the so-called, pure women, and they are now polluted, and we don't want polluted women in a household. And that somewhat makes me wonder about this very institution of family. How do we understand family? And again, if we bring in this very Marxist idea of family, wherein Althusser talks about that, family in fact, trains you from the very beginning of your birth to surrender to, hierarchy, right? And that's how families sort of, bring up individuals, wherein you submit to hierarchy, and this hierarchy can be societal, and this hierarchy can be, social, and psychological and political, right? So that's all I had to say. I think I took up a lot of time. In case there are any questions, any last thoughts, then you could sort of, put that out.
I do not see any questions in the chat box for now. Yes, wait, but the questions that you asked to Prashanta Sharkar, can you please repeat them? Like,
Yeah,
it was a little
I was
long,
just
and I
yeah, I was just trying to understand, Madhuri, about that when we talk about surrogacy and how these foreign couples, come to India and can just, decide to live. We also see it as an institution of the Western control of the non-Western spaces on the lines of capital and on the lines of wealth.
Of course, so I just wanted to add on to what you were saying, when we talk about the imperialist forces or the whole of capitalism, then definitely the first one, I think that the era of colonialism has come to an end, but the imperialism continues in new formats, right? So when you are looking at this particular film, and there are many other pieces of literature as well as they talk about this whole concept of surrogacy, and many other issues that have to do with human bodies and how human bodies are used, as objects, right? So the dignity of the human body is absolutely taken away, and it is just reduced to commodity that can be rented, that can be hired, that can be purchased, and that can be discarded according to one's buying power, right? And that's what we see in the film as well. So it is very, very interesting to see that, how the body of the third world woman is now being used with the advent of new technologies, right? We usually see the technology of surrogacy as a boon for couples who are not able to have children. But at the same point of time, how this boon can be turned into a curse, is a good reminder that we get in the movie. That is one. The second thing is also, of course, the reminder that, how third world countries need to have stricter law when it comes to the use, when it comes to the regulation, bringing into certain regulations when it comes to surrogacy. And there has been, many new laws that have been introduced in the past 2 years. If I go on to talk about this, that would be a paper in itself. But then again, like it's not just the human body that is being used or misused because of the lack of stringent laws or because of loopholes in laws, but also, if you look at the work of Vandana Shiva, you see that the same thing is happening with the land as well, right? The farmer does not have the right to kind of regrow his own seeds, right? So that whole concept where the concept where this idea of GM seeds is basically coming in. The farmer has to go to the capitalistic enterprise and he has to buy these seeds again and again, right? So he cannot grow his own seeds, but because the seeds that he's using can only be used one time, he has to go back to the industry to buy these seeds, right? So it's also very interesting, if we could connect the question of the woman's body with that of the land, right? And how in both cases women as well as farmers, are losing the control over their bodies of their land. Yes, this is an extension, quite a stretch, but I hope that we can think about this.
Right. Very interesting. In fact, Madhuri, and again, what you said, about how there is a control of the market and there is a control of the industry in terms of, your own space to basically, whether it is about, it's giving birth to an individual, right, or conceiving one, or also in terms of, where we talk about the very idea of the land and of course the very idea of fertility, so to say, right, and then how do we sort of tie up these two together. Right. So definitely agree with you. And I think something that I think Frankfurt School has always been very critical of, in terms of Adorno and Max Horkheimer and how they talk about this very idea of, the market and the very idea of the industry and in what way it basically is, going on to, not just empower us, but in fact, leave us, without any, agency and rights, so to say. Yeah, I agree with you.
I also think that Sharmeen and Nurul just joined us. I guess that they wanted to answer the questions that you asked. Hi, Sharmeen.
Yeah, Sharmeen. Okay. Yeah, should I repeat what I said once?
So please.
Yeah, all right. So Sharmeen, I would just curious to know, and since you spoke about space and no space, and of course you were talking about in terms of the very idea of so I was just trying to understand when you talk about space and no space, when you were talking about on the lines of the movement of individuals and people, right? At this point, I think I forgot to mention where Shantanu Chakraborty talks about that how even the nation states and boundaries constantly keep shifting, and constantly keep moving as part of this very idea of decolonization or new nation states that come up, right? So I'm trying to understand the idea of space and no space, not only in terms of the movement of people, but also in terms of the movement of the national spaces and boundaries, how new borders come up, right? And how new nation state come up, right? So that was one. And the second that I was trying to understand how in the 21st century, social media and digital tools, have become a very, I think, important tool to be able to create and retain this very idea of home and belonging, right? Wherein people, who don't have anyone, to connect with, they can come together in this very virtual space and try to create a sense of solidarity. So that's what I was trying to say. So if anyone of, if at all one would like to respond.
So I think my colleague Nurul Qayyum will like to respond to your question.
No problem.
Sir, can you please repeat once?
Yeah.
We're extremely sorry.
No, I was just saying that since you're talking about space and no space, how do we read the virtual space of interaction in this very idea of home and belonging?
Okay, thank you, sir. It's a very good question. Actually, in recent times, uh, in case of globalization, virtual space is very much important because it connects all the home. We call home in different aspects, in different definitions, whether it is state, national state, non-national state, or security space. These all are connected with virtual space. And you have talked about propaganda, right? And in recently, in Ukraine and Russia war, there has been it has been a critical thing. Virtual
Sorry. Nurul.
propaganda
Hello.
from the both sides. And
Hello. Yeah. Hi, Nurul.
about
I'm
other
just
home
interested.
through WhatsApp or we
Sherman, you have to mute yourself because there is
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Nurul, I would like to request you to speak again because your voice was echoing. It would be very kind of you if you could just repeat. And we all are on mute right now.
Yeah. And Sherman, please mute yourself.
thank you. Virtual is very important in social aspect because we know everything about other home through internet or uh,
I'm so sorry, there is a lot of disturbance coming from your end. And Sherman,
No. Hold on. I think Sharmeen and Nurul are sitting side by side.
right.
Right? That's one reason for that echoing. The second is that when Nurul is speaking, Sharmeen, you have to keep yourself on mute. That is the only way how we can escape the disturbance. Yes, just a minute, Nurul. Let Sharmeen mute herself and then you start speaking. Right now, both of you are unmuted. Sharmeen has to mute herself. Sharmeen has to mute her audio. Yeah. Just use one computer. Just use one computer.
Arun, maybe you could just leave the meeting and you could just respond from Sherman's login.
Yeah. I guess that would be better.
Yeah, I think now it's good, Nurul. Now we can hear
Yeah,
you.
this is perfect.
well, virtual this is very important because it connects every other home we have or we call home by different definition. And we know everything about the world through virtual space. And we have talked about Russia and Ukraine war and propaganda war, and it's currently is going on in Europe. And we know everything about the world through virtual space. And without it, but it's not fixed as well. It's always changing. We are always changing divide moods of connecting ourselves. But I think I should have included that in my paper. Sorry, I couldn't.
That's okay, Nurul. You can. I was just asking because I think it's a very good paper, very interesting paper, in fact. And I think you could really bring this up towards the last session of what you're talking about, and could really develop it further. Wherein we talk about this very idea of belonging, and I think when there is so much of a hate, at present, and when of course now we can see how rich nations can attack poor nations and can ruin them overnight. Right. And then, of course, I think in upcoming days, we are going to see, a huge refugee crisis. Already millions of people have left, Ukraine. Of course, you refer to Rohingya, right? So I think in such a very volatile space of existence, then I think tools of, technology could actually come handy in terms of creating a sense of protest, resistance, and also solidarity. So that's all that I wanted to say, and probably you could just link it up, and just try to really just this very idea of belonging, right? because again, this one book that I was writing, Home, and if I could just tell you the name, it is titled Politics of Belonging. And in that paper, the author, in fact, talks about, and in fact problematizes this very idea of belonging, so to say, and this very idea of home, so to say, right? And the name of the author is Paul O'Connor, and the name of the book is Home: The Foundations of Belonging.
Oh, thank you, Prakash. Thank you. I will keep it
Yeah.
in mind.
And there, Paul O'Connor takes this very idea of home, and wherein he brings in, neighbors, families, political, religious, ethnic groups, and to be really understand what is really home, and how home is constantly shifting and changing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, because I don't see any other question in the chat box, I guess we can call it a day, and we can continue these discussions outside this platform as well. I'm glad that we all got to meet each other. Now, one request that I have for all of you is that please fill the feedback form. That's really important because that's how we are registering the participants' attendance, etc. So please do that. And also please note that our next session starts at, just give me a moment, please. Yeah, so our next session starts at 11:30 sharp. And the session 2B will be hosted from the same platform. So please be here at 11:25 sharp. That would be very kind of you all. And thank you so much for your time, all the presenters, and especially Dr. Ved Prakash. Thank you for your insightful comments. I hope we all would get an opportunity to develop further on these comments when we are going to write our papers. I'll see you in session 2C, if I'm not wrong.
Thank you, Dr. Madhuri. Been a pleasure and really nice to be able to talk. And hopefully, in future, these conversations flow in very physical space.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.